How's it going? This is Aaron Price, CEO of TechUnited New Jersey. Excited to be with you today on this 2026 blizzard. Hope you're staying safe wherever you are. Excited for our guest today, talking about communications and how to effectively communicate your business, your pitch. Joining me is Dawn Fallon, the founder and CEO of New Dawn Communications. Dawn, thanks for joining us today.
Great, thanks for having me, Aaron.
Nice to see you. Are you doing okay on the snow day today?
We are. It's still coming down here in northern New Jersey, but we're staying inside and hopefully getting some playtime later on this afternoon.
That's the goal. My kids are enjoying it. So you've worked inside startups. You've worked with founders. Tell people a little bit about what New Dawn Communications is.
Sure. And New Dawn Communications is a consultancy. It's me and a team of consultants that we work with preclinical to clinical stage companies across their storyline. So we tell people everything from the scientific platform to the commercialization of the stories that we tell that story across the key stakeholders.
Awesome. We at our TechUnited events often have a pitch coach critiquing the folks because I believe very strongly that there's the business viability of the actual business and there's the individual's ability to effectively communicate whatever that business is. And I think they're two very distinct and important skills. And I think you share a similar belief.
Absolutely. It's one of those things. That's why I started New Dawn Communications, to give those startups and commercial companies a voice. And we have been able to do so with medtech, med device, digital health companies, pharma companies, and biotech companies across their storylines.
Which can be particularly dense topics to communicate, right? So I'm sure we're going to go through some interesting examples of how you can make some dense materials easier to understand.
Absolutely. It's super important. As I tell people, you want to have your message hit various audiences and you don't want to be too clinical. Even if you're a preclinical company or early stage, you do want to get into the level of, they say, an 8th grader, like the New York Times, so people can understand what you're saying. And as you know, you've been in pitch sessions where you kind of don't understand what they're saying until at the end. And so that's something important that we think we're going to focus on today.
Yeah, well, let's jump into that. You talk about starting at the end before the beginning. What does that mean?
So with your stakeholders, it's really important to think about what they're getting from the end goal, right? So when we say start at the end versus the beginning, you want to think about the journey that you're trying to attract, whether it's B2B or direct to consumer. You want to think about what the end goal would be. So if the end goal is consumer, you got to think about what that starts at the end and why would the patient need that, right? If it's for business, you also want to think, okay, why would the clinician want it, versus other products that potentially solve a solution. And so it's really critical to think about. And then a lot of companies, especially in the early stage, you're aiming at investors, right? They want to know how they're going to make money, how this is going to be hit in the market. Why should I care? Why now? Because a lot of people have great ideas, but will it really succeed in the marketplace? That's really critical for people to think about.
And so how do you think about audience, right? And practicing a pitch for a different audience? Because you just talked about, there's different stakeholders, different potential audiences for this pitch. And so how do you think about what to say based on the different audience?
So depending on what type of company you are, will depend on your stakeholders. Some companies only want to get acquired, right? So their stakeholders could be the investors, the potential strategic partnerships who could eventually acquire them potentially, or if they want to go public, right? Others have intention of going public or being direct to consumer. So they do have that journey of the stakers, investors, to clinicians, to the patient advocacy groups. And it's different stakeholders based on what your end goal will be. Some folks don't have any intention of commercializing it, and that's okay. We've seen that before. We've seen that where companies, they know that they're going to develop a platform that's going to be acquired by a big player like a Novartis. And they know that at the beginning, that they're going to do that. And so they plan backwards, right? Because they want to get FDA approval to then sell that asset to a Novartis. And so that's important to think about because that was what they wanted to aim at. So they created some swell around that with the patient advocacy groups wanting the need. With that was prostate cancer. So again, creating that need with oncologist community, getting their buy-in, testing that message across the board.
And so how do you recommend to people that they actually craft their narrative? And I mean down to the tools. Like, do you suggest they write these things out? Should they use ChatGPT to get some bullet points? And then how do they? What are some recommended steps on how to practice?
Sure, it all depends on your resources. So, working with big companies as long as as large as J&J, my team and I have experience working across big companies like that. It looks different, right? So that one, when I worked at another agency, we had a team that was a 2-day workshop, and we had all the stakeholders there, internal and external stakeholders, and we interviewed them about the certain message that J&J wanted to be. Other companies, they're just born yesterday, and so when you look at that, you want to look at what do your resources look like. So maybe it's the board, and you test the message on the board. You interview, and you do this without prepping them, right? So to make sure that everyone's aligned with what your mission is and what your message will be. And you take all those findings together. We do believe that AI and all those other platforms are important, could be important for you, but we really advise people to kind of do it on your own, because when you feed it to those platforms, they now have it, and your competitors now have it. So really, it's important to think about that if you are going to use those AI platforms, that everyone has that information out there.
What's the biggest mistake that you find that people make, founders in particular, make on narrative?
The biggest mistake is not doing it. We've seen over and over again where the message was never developed. And so what'll happen is the media, a lot of the things that we do is media relations. So building that story with the media. So the media will grab whatever they see online. And then one person says it's this way on the technology or the drug, another person says it's this way, and there's conflicting messages. And then they wonder why, when you do an audit of their coverage, that there's different messages. And there could be different versions of the message, but there should be one central message with sub messages behind it.
So let's dig into that a little bit, right? Like,
Sure.
Is there a particular narrative or a flow to a narrative? Like, for instance, I think in an investor pitch, a very effective narrative can be problem statement, solution, right? Create a little bit of tension. We see XYZ happening in the world that's creating this big problem, and here's our solution. Here's why this is such an enormous market, some of the traction, the team. There's a few other commonly used slides to communicate that. Is there a particular narrative that you like to prescribe in how people try to communicate a story, or do you think it's different for each audience?
It definitely is different for each audience, but definitely the problem solution, is definitely the way to go. And then how to solve it. And with investors is how you're going to make me money. And so when people don't look at how you're going to make me money, and they focus more on the problem and the technology or the solution, and they don't focus on how you're going to make the investor money, you basically have turned your audience this way. And so that's super important, again, to know your audience, who it is. So whether you're pitching on an event or you're in an elevator at a medical conference, right? Think about who you're engaging with and have that specific narrative ready to go, and test it among your key stakeholders.
And when you look to test it, again, I just like to get really into like the weeds. What do you don't want someone to say, oh yeah, that's pretty good. Like, when you test it, what are you specifically looking for? What do you want people to score the pitch in what areas?
So what you try to do is narrow down exactly what the key message and the sub messages will be, and then you start testing among your key stakeholders. A select group will be sufficient, and then take those learnings and incorporate that into your current main message, and also your supporting messages as well. And as you evolve as a company, it will change. It will change. So that's something to think about too, is how often do you want to revisit that narrative? And it could be a bandwidth issue, and that's okay. And that's why you hire agencies like myself or other parties that will help you build that narrative along with you. Because sometimes you'll find that if you do an in-house, there is a subjectivity of it where we're more objective in how we think about things. And so people may be afraid to say what they really want to say about the story or the technology, whatever you're kind of working on. Because so you have a corporate and a product usually kind of narrative.
So great question here from Jackie. How can founders tell if their narrative isn't landing with the stakeholders that they're trying to reach?
You'll see it right away. You'll see that right away in the way people react to it. What you do is do a focus group. And again, it doesn't have to be expensive. Do a focus group, and you're not going to be 100%. We know companies as big as large as Apple, they may not hit the bar, and that's okay. So you're going to try to test it as best as you can, and you're going to keep massaging it, and nothing's going to be perfect. Your message is never going to be perfect. Just do it like Nike. Is it perfect? It may offend people still, but you continue to test that message, and hopefully it resonates among the majority of your audiences.
So let's talk a little bit more about this lens, not just the story. If for someone who's working on pitching something to a large corporate like we're talking about here, what's the process that you suggest that they work on to come up with what this lens is before they get to the story?
So you develop a core list of questions, and again, you could do it virtually or in person. In person, you get a different reaction than virtually, and so different options again based on your budget and your time with. So if you do it virtually, you interview a couple key stakeholders. You interview them, you look at the transcript, and you pull the key findings. That's where you can probably use AI to kind of pull your findings. But again, AI, it can't be that can't be that 100%. You have to kind of fact check it. And then you pull your findings into what they call a presentation of some kind, and you refine it with your company, whoever is involved in it, to refine what that story will look like. And that storyboard or story playbook becomes your narrative for your website, for your social media, for potential meetings you're at, all those things. And then from the in-person, that looks completely different. And again, very similar in the way that it's in person, logistically as well. And the chemistry and the feedback you get will be real time. So you definitely have to have a lot more people there to help facilitate those type of workshops that are needed.
Can you share a little bit more about your Novartis experience? How you workshop that? Was it successful? I've got a few follow-ups, so we'll start there.
Sure. For that one, we identified the key oncologists that we wanted to talk about. The language was very nuanced. It could offend folks the way it was said. And so we tested it among key oncologists that the client had identified, and then others that we identified from an outside party. And then we interviewed these doctors. We asked them, frankly, are you okay with this language? Does it resonate with you? And then from that, then we crafted the main message and the sub messages, and we tested it again, and then we refined it. So that's kind of what we did for the Novartis situation. And it was for a small biotech company which got acquired, and that helped us when we went to that eventual acquisition that we didn't handle, but the client did. It helped with their narrative to get it out there.
So what if someone has an investor pitch tomorrow? They don't have time. Maybe they haven't done all this pre-work. Any shortcuts of things you'd recommend to someone? Perhaps they need to also go through that process, but anything they can do to prepare themselves to make sure that their narrative may land if something's coming up, imminently.
Yes. So it's one of those things we highly advise if you're not yet ready to hold off. But if that is the case, then you got to just do it really fast and furious type thing and identify maybe one of the key stakeholders that you can identify, and you just run with it. But it's highly advised that, and we've seen this before, where people are not ready to pitch. They go in front of an investor presentation, a big one, and the story doesn't resonate. And so it leaves a bad taste, unfortunately, in front of the investor. They walk out not knowing what the story is. And they basically, that company now has been put aside, because you really have one time to shine. And yes, you can refine it, but it's one of those things that when you're not ready to pitch, that's okay. Like, get ready to pitch and practice with the smaller pitch sessions, which they have across different companies and so forth.
What about, we're talking in this case a little bit life sciences and biotech. Some of these things can be very technical. You shared an example where you were talking to oncologists, so I'm assuming they could speak the technical language that was necessary. What do you do if you are, let's say for that same example, but you're pitching an investor who may not be familiar with the space? How do you recommend to people to simplify language and be able to speak in a way that the technical terms can still, you still have a position of authority and clear know-how in the space without confusing people?
That's a very good question. Actually, for that one, because it was so difficult, we created examples of what it could look like. So the way the technology looked like, we said it's like a key card. When you take the key card and you put it in front of the door, it opens. That's how this technology works. So that helped them understand, hey, okay, I understand. Okay, that's how the platform works. And then we implement it for prostate cancer. And so that was we gave 3 different scenarios of what it could look like. And we ran it by, of course, those oncologists to see, does that make sense? And like, oh yeah, sure. So again, narrowed it down to a very simple thing, like a hotel key, and knowing that the technology was able to kind of unlock that door. That's what it did for prostate cancer. And so it was like targeting their actual targeting the situation where the sale was happening. So like that's what we were showing that the hotel key could do.
How much do you coach people to memorize a pitch versus versus other styles? But I know a lot of folks specifically who look to memorize exactly what they're going to say. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm not a huge component of memorization. It's practice. Practice makes perfect. I feel like it's not authentic when you memorize as much. I mean, people try to do that, and I know it's different, of course, when you're watching a film and they're memorizing the lines. But when you're in the pitch, you want to be authentic. You want to be fluid, and it's not going to be perfect all the time, and that's okay because you're human. So when you do try to memorize it, it becomes a little bit artificial, is my belief. But it's up to people's own choosing and how they want to proceed with the pitch.
Yeah, I would agree strongly. I think memorization is a big mistake. I wouldn't. I mean, it's they can of course make the decision, but I think it always comes across as robotic every time I've seen that happen.
Of course.
Why do you think things like broken links? I tend to be very specific on design and things working in a certain image that we're looking to portray. Why do you? And some people give me a hard time about that. Why do you think things like broken links or sloppy decks matter?
Because it's such your footprint in your story, and it's when you're not right. And right now I have a friend who's starting a startup right now in the beverage situation. I'm going to tell her about her narrative. Like before you get out there, work on your narrative and then go out in the field. Because it's credibility. You want to build that trust and credibility, regardless if it's medtech, medical device, any category. The credibility is what you want to build. And that means, not say perfection, but as close to perfection as possible. And so allow that extra runway. And I was talking to one of your teammates earlier about prepare for it, right? You want to prepare for things. And if you're not ready, that's okay. I know sometimes folks, if they're, their audience are stakeholders, they're nervous that they didn't hit a certain milestones. That's okay. But you want to be as much prepared for that non-update for that investor.
And so, one of the tools that I've used quite a bit is, I don't always write them on actual note cards, but if you think of a note card strategy where you write just a few bullet points on a card and look to get, basically, you know how to tell a story from A to B to C if those are the points on the card, and practicing it that way. Are there any tips? And your metaphor example, I think before makes a lot of sense. I think we had a comment about someone highlighting that is a great. It makes a lot of sense of a way to make dense and difficult technical topics more relatable. Any other practical exercises that you recommend people try? Whether it's, obviously make sure your decks and materials look good. There's lots of tools to work out grammar and spelling. What about people who tend to say a lot or rock around in a room? Like any physical, do you do any training on people on their physical behaviors and how they present and own a room?
Yes, we definitely do. It's again practice. So what we'll do is for a lot of like Bio New Jersey has an upcoming event for pitching, and I'll be one of the coaches. So it's like how they are communicating. One, is their deck correct, or in the best way it could be correct. Two, how are they presenting it? And I think the more you do it, the better you get at it. And a lot of founders, the PhDs, which are fantastic, they know the science, but when they go in front of the room, they get scared, and that's okay. So maybe you're not the right person. So it's sometimes like you have to step back and say, hey, wait, maybe I'm not the right person to present. And that's okay. Just because you develop the technology or the platform doesn't mean you have to be the one on the podium. And so that's something to think about too. I feel like that's super important for people to realize that eventually you need to kind of find the best spokesperson for your company at that given time, because you're in front of a key audience who's listening, and you're out there and you want to impress them in a way that makes sense for them to invest in your technology.
I think that with practice, anyone can be a great communicator, in particular, a very good presenter. Do you agree with that? And even if you do, when do you think someone should decide, well, I'm not the one who's going to present this, even though I might be the founder of this thing?
That's always tricky in a conversation that I've dealt with before. It's tough because when you're so close to the invention, you don't want to step away. So you try to, like, we try to guide our clients as best as possible to continue to work on it, and also record it and see how, and play it back to yourself and say, well, and then maybe eventually they'll say, hey, I'll step back. Or maybe they, like you said, like someone gets better and better at their story and they nail it the next time. So it's one of those things you have to be comfortable in telling your story at any given time. because whether you're the founder or part of the C-suite, you're the face of the company.
Yeah. I actually think that recording, we all walk around with a video camera in our pocket, and I think recording your pitch and watching it back is the most telling practical tool that anyone can do. They'll pick up on things that they don't realize that they do all the time. If someone can't afford help like yours, and maybe they're not, I don't know if people realize, but you're a mentor in our Uplift mentorship group. So thank you for being part of that.
You're welcome.
But if people don't have access to someone like you, how can they get help and honest feedback if they're on a lean budget?
So there's a lot of networking groups you can go to that you can practice your pitch consistently. I used to actually belong to one of them, and it's a global one. And you have to practice every Thursday your pitch. Like, I couldn't do it for various reasons, but it helped refine my pitch. My pitch was harder because people didn't know what communications was, and they also didn't know what healthcare communication was. So I had those two different conflicting things that they didn't understand what one thing and the other, which is hard. Versus if I'm in an area, for example, I belong to a bunch of nonprofits in the life science space, that if I were a company pitching, I could practice with those folks. And you'll be surprised, a lot of people, if you reach out to them, they may be willing to help you out. Maybe not 100%, but at least a piece of their advice could help shape what you're trying to develop.
How do you know that you're getting the right advice?
Very good question. That's a tricky one, I guess. I guess based on the people that you engage with, based on their experience, kind of like when you think about a company, why would you invest in a company with a leadership that didn't have the experience? So when I look at mentors or even mentees and so forth too, I look to see, okay, what is their background? Is there a connection there that I can help, or they can help me? And that's kind of the best way. It's based on experience, I think, and the trust you have, and also if it's a referral or not, that person, you'll know it came from a trusted source. And that's what I do a lot of times in my network in general. If I have someone from a trusted source, I know they've been vetted.
All right, so we had a question from Hannah pop up on the screen. If she was a solo founder, I think what steps could she take? I think was the question. Maybe we'll get that back in a moment. Where should she start?
Where should she start in terms of her narrative?
I think let's kind of walk through the process, right? Someone has a business that they think is showing some traction. They need to get customers. They need to pitch investors. What exercise would you recommend that they go through to craft that narrative for each of those audiences?
So it's depending on what it is. I guess it depends on their stakeholders. And then if you have connections within those stakeholders, I would approach it that way. If not, and you do have the resources, of course, if you're a bigger company, of course, you can hire an outside party to identify those stakeholders. But if you're a small company, within your network, are there folks in there who can test pilot that message for you?
Well, so let's say you identify.
And that's what we're doing right now with my friend who's going to be launching our beverage company. We're testing.
Sorry, we had a little delay. I think the audio broke out for a second, but continued on that story or that narrative. Once you have the potential opportunity to be in front of those different audiences,
yes,
what's the process you recommend to come up with how to figure out the right message for that audience? And in particular, what's the goal of that meeting?
Again, I think it varies per category. So I would need a little more color on this person if they're willing to share what type of company they're looking to build. And that could help me provide a better answer. But, generically, it's really, you got to look at your network. LinkedIn is awesome too. And, interview folks where it makes sense to kind of shape that message. And then again, as you evolve, you can test it and do like a focus group of some kind and go from there.
I might add that, for investors in venture in particular, a common saying is the goal is to get the next meeting. You're not, especially in the first meeting, it's very, very unlikely that you'll walk out with a check in the first meeting.
Yes, exactly.
It's similar. Driving urgency, I think, is a really important part of the process. So to leave people with enough compelling enough narrative that they want to speak again and they want to speak again soon, I think is a great point. I think we saw that David mentioned that 1 Million Cups is another great resource for people who are looking to network and potentially find help and feedback, which I'd agree. Any other practical things that you would suggest that founders can do right away to improve their pitch?
So what we do recommend is looking what they call a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. That's something that's important as part of the narrative. Some companies don't do that at all, but your SWOT changes again as your company evolves. So definitely look at that SWOT as it relates to yourself and the company, as well as it relates to the product you're building. And then also, in addition to that, think about your competitors. Who are your competitors? Why should someone choose you over versus others, right? The competitive audit is super important to kind of do, take a look at the messages that they're using, because I'm sure in the back end, they could have done some research, especially if they're a bigger player. They've done research, which is kind of pre-planning for you to think about your narrative. So we do advise about 3 to 5 different competitors you take a look at, right? And do that audit and look to see, and you'll see certain things. We've done this before with clients where we've seen certain words keep coming up. So you want to make sure you're using those words. And if not, you're not using those words. Why? Right? Why are you not using those words when you see it consistently through all your competitors? They just say that one word, right? Or it's a couple words. That's something to look at too. The competitive audit is super important in addition to the SWOT, and then all the focus group we talked about.
So, in looking at your competitors and seeing the language that they use, when would you think to perhaps use some of that language? And when, in some cases you want to differentiate, it might be you want to have your own voice as a brand, or maybe your own style in communicating these things. How do you recommend to folks and how they decide when to copy some of those things and when to differentiate?
I think that's where the digital background comes on. So like SEO and things of that nature, how, if you can hire an agency or a sole practitioner who can do that back end work about what is being said about that space, that's kind of what I would advise doing first to help inform how you're writing your messaging.
You're talking more about discoverability and search.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Versus a live pitch, right?
Yes, that would be super helpful, because that's going to happen afterwards too, right? When people Google you after the meeting, that's going to impact how you're showing up.
Yeah. Is there? Do you have recommendations for folks who are doing the live person pitch about how they decide what language to use? Or do you think it's just about being consistent across all channels?
Yeah, the consistency is very important in terms of how you're showing up. Because if you do have a narrative that's different, it's going to show up whether it's in person, that's being transcribed, right? Because when you think about it, a lot of times people have their camera, they have their cell phones and they're recording things, so you don't know what is being picked upon. So I want to say your live pitch should be somewhat similar to your online presence where needed, where possible, because it's consistency that matters when you're out in the field.
Anything that you recommend to people that in how they communicate differently if they're doing something virtually or in person?
Short and simple and sweet, as I could say, especially in your pitch. We talked about earlier about when you're in front of an investor, talking at the 8th grade level, not so high science type thing. It's really important because your audience will get lost, and we've seen this over and over again. So I think that applies for both virtual and in person. And then in person, be the lively person you are. And if you're not, you got to keep working on it, right? Because it's so important when you're out in the field, because the energy is a lot different when you're interacting with someone. And virtually, show your energy, show that you're excited about something, show that you're excited about who your person you're talking to. And we've seen this before when you're on a Zoom meeting and it's very flat. Step back, right? Step back. I'm not saying you have to show up super energetic, but you want to show some energy because that's going to come across on the other side.
Yeah, totally agree. Well, Dawn, I want to thank you for sharing your knowledge with us today, and also for being a mentor in the Uplift mentorship program. For those who aren't aware, we run several cohorts throughout the year where people like Dawn help to be mentors to small business owners and founders to help them grow their businesses, make fewer mistakes, things I wish that I had when I still have these things now, and certainly wish that I had them when I was younger in my, starting out with my businesses, and could have saved myself from many mistakes if I was surrounded with more folks like you. So we really appreciate your involvement in Uplift and your involvement in TechUnited New Jersey. More importantly, for folks who are interested in connecting with Dawn, well, first, where can they find you and New Dawn Communications?
Sure, they can find me on LinkedIn. I answer all the messages, so happy to send on LinkedIn. Look for me, Dawn Fallon, New Dawn Communications. You can go to my website at www.newdawncommunications.com. You can find me online again there. newdawncomms.com is there, and I'm happy to answer questions, offline. And really excited, Aaron. Thank you so much for allowing me to share my story and help others.
Well, we really appreciate it. There's a tight knit group in New Jersey, and it's folks like you who really help a lot of these people build more, faster, and smarter. And if people are looking to connect with Dawn and others outside of her specifically in her company, but they want to be part of the mentorship community and Uplift, check out techunited.co/mentorship. You can join our next cohort where we put you together with mentors for one-on-one coaching. We have some educational sessions, some peer group work to connect with other peers in your industry or at a similar stage of your business, which I think, like, getting out of the house, so to speak, and speaking to people like you, practicing these things, I think there's a direct correlation with success. So thanks again for joining us today. I hope you are able to stay inside and maybe enjoy some of the snow. But thanks again for being part of the TechUnited community and Uplift specifically.
Anytime, Aaron. Thank you so much.
Thank you.